In the quiet countryside of Willow Ridge, a small rural town on the edge of North Carolina, lived a humble farmer named Caleb Whitmore. For over 3 generations, Caleb's family had worked and preserved their 60-acre farm, nestled between rolling hills and thick woods. His days were simple, tending to livestock, planting seasonal crops, and watching over his teenage daughter, who was recovering from a long illness. As cities expanded, suburban neighborhoods crept closer to Caleb's land. One such development, Oak Haven Estates, brought with it a powerful homeowners association, HOA, determined to beautify the area, even if that meant strong-arming the only holdout farmer left. Caleb had always declined to join the HOA, refusing to sacrifice the soul of his land for manicured sidewalks and HOA bylaws. He wasn't a man of conflict, but he believed in what his grandfather had taught him. This land has a heart. It remembers who takes care of it. Caleb didn't know it yet, but that same land was about to be the center of a storm, one that would challenge everything he believed in and reveal a secret buried decades ago that could either destroy everything or set it right once and for all. It was a gray autumn morning when everything changed. Caleb Whitmore had just returned from the city after spending several days at the hospital with his daughter Amelia, who had taken a turn for the worse in her recovery. Exhausted and emotionally drained, he drove up the gravel path leading to his farmhouse, only to find his land violated. A sleek, shiny tourist train track now ran straight through the heart of his eastern cornfield, the most fertile patch on his entire property. The field had been torn apart, flattened, and desecrated. The fence had been removed, heavy machinery tracks embedded in the soil, and crops were scattered like debris after a storm. It felt like someone had ripped out a piece of his soul. And the worst part? He hadn't been notified. No letter, no phone call, no neighborly warning. Enraged, Caleb stormed down to the local HOA office of Oak Haven Estates, which sat smugly just beyond the border of his property. An overly modern building with glass panels and artificial turf, starkly contrasting the natural beauty of the farmland. Inside, he was met by Clinton Monroe, the smug HOA president, who spoke with a plastic smile and rehearsed calm. "We assumed you had no objections," Clinton said with a shrug. "After all, we sent notices to all surrounding properties 3 weeks ago. It's your responsibility to check your mail." Caleb's fists clenched. "I wasn't here. My daughter was in the hospital. You trespassed. You destroyed my crop." Clinton didn't flinch. Legally, the county zoning maps indicate a shared easement, and the board approved the tourism train as part of our neighborhood beautification initiative. "Beautification?" Caleb spat. "You ran a train through my land like it was an abandoned lot." When Caleb demanded proof, Clinton slid a thin folder across the desk. Inside were maps, permits, and council signatures, all signed, sealed, and seemingly legitimate. But Caleb knew something was wrong. He had never granted easement, and he was damn sure his grandfather hadn't either. Feeling defeated but far from done, Caleb returned home that evening, standing silently in the moonlight beside the ruined field. The night air was cool, the wind gently brushing through the broken stalks. It wasn't just about the crop. It was about the principle, the respect, the legacy. He walked into the attic where old trunks from his grandfather's time lay untouched. Inside one, buried beneath faded seed catalogs and worn flannel shirts, he found an old land deed. It was fragile but legible. Next to it was a hand-drawn map from 1968, created by his grandfather himself. What Caleb saw next made his heart pound. The HOA building, the one Clinton Monroe operated from, was clearly marked. within the boundaries of the Whitmore family land. Caleb couldn't sleep that night. His eyes stayed fixed on the faded map spread across his kitchen table. The lines were hand-drawn, but precise. The markers, clear. His grandfather's old cursive labeled boundaries, landmarks, and deed numbers with meticulous care. According to this map, and the original land deed it was folded with, the Whitmore property extended nearly 80 feet beyond what the county currently recognized, which meant the HOA's pristine glass office building stood smack in the middle of his land. His mind raced. Had someone made a mistake in zoning decades ago? Or had something been covered up deliberately? By sunrise, Caleb drove into the county records office in town. It was quiet on weekends, but the clerk, an older gentleman named Howard Briggs, had known the Whitmore family for years. Caleb laid both the map and deed down in front of him. Howard adjusted his glasses, leaning forward slowly. Caleb, where on earth did you get this? My grandfather's attic. I think the county maps are wrong. They've got my land ending at that little stream. But this map, it shows it going at least 200 feet further east. Howard pulled up digital records and overlays. The current zoning documents were all based on a reclassification done in 1982, almost 15 years after Caleb's grandfather had drawn the original map. No official record of a boundary adjustment could be found. No legal signature from any Whitmore. Nothing. This is a mess, Howard muttered. But if what you've got here holds up in court, Caleb, you might not just own that land. You might own the very building the HOA is using. For the first time in days, a flicker of hope surged through Caleb's chest. But he didn't rush to confront Clinton Monroe. Not yet. Instead, he hired a property rights attorney. Madeline Shore, a fiery advocate known for taking on crooked land disputes and winning. She took one look at Caleb's documents and said, "You're sitting on a gold mine and a legal time bomb for that HOA." But what shocked her most was how brazen the HOA had been. Not only had they crossed onto his land without consent, they had built on it, profited from it, and used it to enforce power over residents. By the end of the week, Madeline had filed for a quiet title action, a legal process to reclaim land ownership where documents were misfiled or overlooked. Caleb didn't go public, not yet. He wanted the ruling to be airtight. But news had a way of spreading. A former HOA secretary, Grace Ellison, reached out in secret. She had once questioned the HOA's land acquisitions and had been pushed out quietly. She brought with her something explosive, a sealed envelope dated 1982, addressed to Caleb's grandfather, never delivered. Inside was a letter from a zoning official apologizing for the remapping error and requesting a formal signature for boundary change approval. The signature line? Blank. Caleb's chest tightened. They knew. They had known all along. And now, it was time to act. Caleb sat alone on the porch swing, the autumn breeze brushing across his face as orange leaves drifted down around him. The revelation of the HOA's deception still throbbed in his chest, but something had shifted inside him. He had every right to be furious, to demand the building be torn down, to sue the HOA into the ground, to expose Clinton Monroe for the manipulative bully he was. And yet, as he looked out across his land, the broken cornstalks, the ruined fence, the distant silhouette of the HOA building, it wasn't vengeance that filled him. It was clarity. For the first time in weeks, Caleb wasn't thinking about what they had taken from him. He was thinking about what he could build from it. That night, Over dinner with his daughter Amelia, who had finally returned home from the hospital, he shared everything. The old map, the land rights, the letter never delivered. Her eyes lit up. "Dad, what if you didn't just win this for yourself? What if you turned it into something bigger?" Caleb blinked. "Like what?" She smiled weakly but with conviction. "Like a message. Something that says people like them don't get to erase people like us." That conversation planted a seed. Over the next week, Caleb met quietly with Madeline Shore and proposed a bold move, not to destroy the HOA, but to repurpose their power. With the legal victory almost certain, he drafted a plan. He would officially claim the land, and instead of selling it or evicting them, he would donate the building to a nonprofit organization that served homeless veterans. It was symbolic. His grandfather had been a World War II veteran. Caleb had grown up hearing his stories of hardship, loyalty, and honor. Now, with that same building the HOA had weaponized against others, Caleb would create a space that actually served people. Madeline was stunned. "You're about to flip the script on them in a way they'll never see coming." When word of Caleb's quiet title case finally reached Clinton Monroe, panic spread across the HOA board. Emergency meetings were held. Lawyers were scrambled. They tried to negotiate, tried to settle, even offered him money to look the other way. But Caleb wasn't interested in a payout. He wanted change. At the next HOA public meeting, Caleb walked in, boots dusty, hat in hand, and calmly placed a copy of the verified deed on the table. "I'm not here to argue," he said, voice steady. "I'm here to inform you that your building sits on my land. You'll be vacating in 30 days, and come the 1st of next month, this place will be a safe haven for veterans who gave more than most of us ever will." Silence, then murmurs, then applause, from the residents who'd long felt voiceless. In that moment, Caleb realized something. He wasn't just a farmer reclaiming land. He was reclaiming dignity, community, and legacy. Within days of Caleb's announcement, the small town of Willow Ridge began to buzz with a quiet kind of electricity, something deeper than gossip or scandal. Word spread quickly. The farmer who never bowed to the HOA had just handed them their final notice and gifted their headquarters to homeless veterans. What had started as a land dispute had become a movement. Local news outlets picked up the story. "Farmer reclaims land, turns tables on HOA," read one headline. But the heart of the coverage wasn't the legal twist. It was the intention behind it. Caleb Whitmore wasn't just reclaiming what was his, he was redefining what should be. Within a week, Caleb received a letter from Veterans Rising, a national nonprofit that provided housing and job training to retired service members. Touched by his gesture, they offered to partner with him to convert the building into a community outreach center, one that would serve not only veterans, but also provide mental health counseling and job placement for struggling residents. Caleb stood in the same field that had once been ravaged by the HOA's train project, now cleared and slowly healing. Volunteers, some of them former HOA residents, showed up with work gloves and open hearts. Even those who had once looked down on his dusty boots and untrimmed hedges now admired his unshakable resolve. Among them was Grace Ellison, the former HOA secretary who had exposed the cover-up. She stepped beside Caleb one morning with a clipboard and a shy smile. "You've started something real here," she said. "People are remembering how to care." Caleb nodded. "It's never been about fences and bylaws. It's about people. That's what we forgot." The community rallied. Local businesses donated supplies. High school students painted murals. Retired builders volunteered to renovate the HOA building, transforming sterile boardrooms into warm lounges and counseling offices. The biggest surprise came from within the HOA ranks themselves. Marvin Dent, a longtime board member who had quietly watched Clinton Monroe rule with arrogance, stepped down and publicly apologized to the community. "I forgot what neighborhoods were supposed to be," he admitted at a town hall. "Caleb reminded me." As construction on the new Whitmore Community and Veterans Center began, the entire tone of the neighborhood shifted. Where once there were tensions and divisions, now there were shared goals and handshakes. Residents offered Caleb seeds to replant his field. Some even brought their children to help clean debris or feed the animals. Amelia, now regaining her strength, began painting again. Her first piece? A canvas showing their barn with rays of light breaking through dark clouds. A symbol, she said, of home standing tall, no matter what tries to bury it. Through heartbreak, loss, and betrayal, Caleb had found something he never expected. A deeper connection to his roots, and a future where that connection lifted others with him. The land had spoken, and this time it was healing more than just itself. Months passed, and the landscape of Willow Ridge began to transform, not just physically, but emotionally. Fields once scarred by betrayal now bloomed again with life, and at the center of it all was Caleb Whitmore. No longer seen as just a stubborn farmer, but as the quiet heart of a reawakening town. Caleb himself had changed. Where once he walked with the weight of isolation, now he moved with quiet purpose. He smiled more. He spoke not just with resolve, but with a gentleness that invited others in. It wasn't just the land he had reclaimed. It was a sense of belonging he hadn't realized he'd lost. The opening day of the Whitmore Community and Veterans Center arrived in early spring. The air was crisp, the sky wide and blue. Dozens of townspeople gathered side by side with veterans in uniform and children holding welcome signs. Caleb stood near the entrance, a bit uncomfortable in a clean button-down shirt Amelia had picked for him. As people toured the center, admiring the new kitchen, counseling rooms, and open hall filled with donated books and handmade quilts, Caleb noticed something unexpected. Clinton Monroe, the former HOA president, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. Caleb approached him, slow and steady. "I'm not here to argue," Clinton said first, eyes downcast. "I came to see it with my own eyes, what you turned this place into." Caleb studied him for a moment. "You could have done this too. You had the chance." Clinton nodded. "I know. I got lost in control, in power. Thought that meant order. I didn't see the people, not really." He paused. "But you did, and I respect that." There was no grand handshake, no absolution. But as Clinton walked away, Caleb felt something lift, a quiet forgiveness, not for the other man, but for the part of himself that had once let anger take root. That part was gone now. Back at the house, Amelia surprised him with a small wooden sign. Hand-painted, it read, "The heart remembers." It was something Grandpa used to say, she reminded him. Now everyone knows it's true. Caleb placed the sign at the entrance to the property, right next to the old mailbox. And every time someone came, whether to volunteer, seek help, or just say hello, they passed by that sign. A reminder that land isn't just soil and trees. It's memory. It's history. And if cared for right, it becomes healing. Caleb had grown from a man fighting to preserve the past into someone who planted seeds for a better future, not just for himself, but for generations to come. His journey had started with a broken fence. It ended with open doors. It had been exactly 1 year since Caleb Whitmore stood in front of the HOA board and told them the building was no longer theirs. Now, that same building stood tall with new life. The sleek metal sign that once read Oak Haven HOA had been replaced with a warm, wooden one carved by a local craftsman. Whitmore Center, for veterans and community. The grand reopening wasn't a parade or a headline-grabbing event. It was a neighborhood potluck. Tables lined the lawn, filled with casseroles, pies, and sweet tea. Laughter drifted on the breeze. Children played tag between fruit trees Caleb had planted with Amelia that spring. Veterans shared stories around fire pits, while high schoolers filmed interviews for a community documentary project. Caleb stood off to the side, his hands resting in his back pockets, watching the life around him. There were no speeches, no accolades, just people, connected, real, and home. Grace Ellison approached, balancing a paper plate stacked with cornbread. "You know, they should name a street after you," he chuckled. "I'd rather keep the dirt roads. They tell better stories." She smiled. "Well, the way I see it, you didn't just win a land dispute. You rewrote the story of this whole town." It was true. Willow Ridge wasn't just recovering, it was reborn. The combative, cold grip of the HOA had dissolved, replaced by a community-led council where residents, young and old, new and native, shared equal voice. The absurd bylaws were scrapped. In their place were shared values, fairness, empathy, responsibility, and the land that had nearly been lost, it had become the heartbeat of it all. Caleb's farm now hosted monthly farmers markets, seasonal festivals, and youth education days. Veterans living in the Whitmore Center helped build a greenhouse, mentor teens, and even train therapy dogs for PTSD patients. As the sun began to set, casting a warm amber glow across the fields, Amelia stood beside her father, camera in hand. "Smile," she said, snapping a photo as he looked toward the barn, framed in gold light. "You ever think we'd get here?" he asked her. Amelia shook her head. "Not like this. But I think this was exactly where we were meant to end up." Caleb looked out across the land, his grandfather's land, his legacy, and saw something deeper than just restored fences or repaired soil. He saw healing made visible, not just his own, not just his family's, but an entire town's. Sometimes the world tries to bury you under bureaucracy, greed, or loss. But Caleb had learned something in the most unexpected way. When you stand your ground with grace, when you plant seeds in the ashes, the harvest is greater than anything you could imagine. And long after the crowds left, the potluck ended, and night settled in over Willow Ridge, the land remained, strong, rooted, and finally, free. The story of Caleb Whitmore teaches us that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks in quiet resilience and steady roots. When we face injustice, especially from those in positions of control, the first instinct is often to fight back with force. But Caleb chose a different path, one of integrity, patience, and purpose. He didn't just reclaim what was his, he transformed it into something far more powerful. This story reminds us that legacy isn't about holding on to the past. It's about planting seeds that outlive you. By channeling his pain into service, Caleb created a ripple effect that healed more than just a field. He healed a town. He inspired compassion. And he proved that true power lies not in domination, but in connection. Sometimes life gives you lemons. Sometimes it burns your whole orchard down. But the ones who thrive, they're the ones who plant again, on the same soil with deeper roots. If you're facing unfair treatment at work, in your neighborhood, or in your personal life, remember this: you have more power than you think. Start by understanding your rights, gathering your facts, and aligning your actions with purpose, not just emotion. Don't just fight back, build forward. Whether you volunteer at a local shelter, speak up for those who can't, or even just take care of what's yours with pride, know this: the way you respond matters. You may not own acres of land like Caleb, but your influence, your voice, can reshape your community. Sometimes the boldest thing you can do is to turn the damage into a foundation,